Good morning. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy. This morning's video is being shot from my home in Vermont, where it's a little bit colder. I'm wearing a jacket, no t-shirt and shorts. It's not Amsterdam, where it was almost 70 one of the days. It's more like 32. There's frost on the ground. All the trees have lost their leaves. This is Vermont. We're getting ready for ski season. I just had 6 tons of pellets delivered this morning, so we're going to stay warm. But this video is to announce a new webinar that we're going to be giving on November 2nd, Friday at noon Eastern Time. So that's November 2nd, Friday, noon Eastern Time. And this webinar is going to be about design controls. And we've recorded webinars before about design controls, but this one is going to focus on the things that you need to do step by step for your first design history file. It's really geared towards the company that hasn't done this before. What are we supposed to do? It's very frustrating for both the company and our team when you have a product that's all ready for market, so you think, and we don't have any design history documentation. We have to create it retroactively, and there are a couple of key design tests that need to be done that you didn't even know were required. And maybe your design isn't able to pass those tests because you didn't consider them when you designed the device. So we're trying to avoid that. The first step is a design plan. So that's going to be your first design review that you're ever going to have, and you're going to approve that plan. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to provide a design plan and risk management plan that's combined as a template. So if you purchase our design control procedure or you work with us as a client, we'll provide that to you, and that will really help you identify, here's all the things that we need to do in the design process step by step. And so that plan will really be helpful. It'll especially be helpful for anybody that hasn't done the risk management documentation before that's required for CE marking or for a high-risk device. Having that risk management plan integrated into the design control plan will really help you. The second design review that you're going to do, design review number 2, is to approve your design inputs. I actually think this is the most important design review for new companies or even companies that are established. The key to the second design review is you're defining all the testing that is going to be required for approval of your product. What are the regulatory requirements? Before you submit this, you want to make sure all your testing is done. And you want to make sure your design is capable of passing that testing. So you want to figure those out before you finish your design, not after you finish your design. So they're design inputs, not design outputs. Design inputs are all the testing that's required. So companies will finish their design, then they'll come to me and say, what testing do we have to pass? No. You're supposed to do that up front before you design your device. So that's what we're going to help companies with, is how to develop a design input and approve that. That's your second design review. The third design review is what we call a design freeze. This is where you approve your outputs. We call it a freeze because you really want to make sure that you don't make any changes after that point, because if you do testing and then make a change, you're going to have to go back and redo all the testing, or at least some of it. And that can get very expensive. So you want to freeze the design, not make any more changes unless absolutely necessary. Like, for instance, you failed a test. Good reason to go back and change the design so it passes. So outputs are going to be your specifications, your drawings, your labeling. Those are going to be approved. Then you're going to do your design verification. Design verification is going to be all the tests that you defined in the design inputs. You're going to subject your new device to those. A lot of it will be benchtop testing, but you want to make sure you don't miss any. And while you were working on the design outputs, you should have been gathering quotes for this design verification testing. Once you've completed all your design verification testing, then you're going to approve those test reports. For some companies that have lower risk devices that don't require clinical studies, you're going to actually be able to submit it to the FDA now. So that fourth design review you do where you approve all the design verification outputs, you can also say, I'm ready for my regulatory submission now. For other companies that are CE marking or companies that have devices that require a clinical study, you're going to have to go on to design validation. So really your design review where you approve the design verification test reports, you're saying our product is safe enough now that we feel confident we can go on to clinical studies without doing any harm to patients, and it will be safe. We don't know if it's going to be efficacious, but we at least know it's going to have a relatively high level of safety, at least safe enough that we feel comfortable going into the clinical study. The fifth design review you're going to do, and this isn't required if your company isn't doing any clinical studies, but that fifth design review would be saying, all our clinical study test data looks good, we're okay with the final draft of our clinical study summary report, and we're ready to submit this now to the regulator for approval. So sometimes you'll do that fifth design review, or sometimes you won't. Then you have your sixth design review. This is after you get a response from the regulator approving your product. Now you have to decide, are we ready to actually launch it commercially? So there's a few things that you have to do between the time the FDA says yes, or the time your CE marking notified body says yes, and when you're going to actually launch your product. You need to make sure that you're registered, you need to make sure you're listed, you need to make sure that you have your UDI labeling updated, you need to have that data inputted into the GUDID database, you need to make sure that all your manufacturing processes are validated, the process are validated, not just the product. And it's quite possible that you did a lot of your verification and validation testing on prototypes, so you might have to do some additional verification to make sure that the commercial versions are equivalent to the prototypes that you were making before. You might have to qualify a new supplier. You might have to establish distribution channels. You might have to set up additional agreements with those distributors. There's a lot of things that need to be done before you can just commercialize your product. You might be able to sell a few units, but really to get ramped up properly, there's a lot of things that need to be done to sell more than just a few units. So that'll be your final design review. You say everything's ready, and now we're ready for commercial release of our product. So those are your 6 design reviews, and one of them might not be required if you don't have a clinical study. But we're going to review each of those steps in detail. We're going to explain what inputs and outputs are of each of those steps of the process, what documentation you should establish. We're going to talk about what tools you could use to document some of that, and we'll be available to answer any of your questions. So, looking forward to having you participate in that webinar on November 2nd, Friday at noon Eastern Time. Thank you, and talk to you then.